What happens when the Eldar gods face the Catan? What was the consequences of that conflict involving them and the fate of the Eldari as a whole? And what part of the universe changes when a Catan wills it so? How did the ripples of this conflict lead to the end of the Eldar's immortal lives? And how were they reborn prior to the fall? First up, we look to the example of Cegorach, trickster god of the Eldar, versus the Catan, the outsider, or a Tsara Noga. Another of the Catan things in the dome burst into multicoloured light, revealing itself to be the laughing god. He bowed low as the floating metallic apparition turned once more towards him, and once again it feasted on one of its own foul kind, believing it to be that great harlequin. The projections around its metallic form became broken up by the silent screaming faces of its murdered kin. Its long alien head whipped around, trying to find the laughing god. The impure energies it had drained from the husks of its fellow Catan, playing around its head in a halo of dark light, it had grown significantly larger, the power it exuded filling the auditorium with crackling static. The skull faces rippling across its metallic form, evidence of its vile fratricide, was screaming, pushing out in all directions. In the blink of an eye, the laughing god appeared behind it, before it, above it, and below it, in a whirling, multicoloured dance of confusion. With a piercing scream of rage and defeat, the Catan clutched its head, spasming as it grew smaller and smaller, folding in on itself and growing dim. The sparkling doppelgangers of the laughing god leapt into each other with astounding acrobatic grace, coalescing into but one figure, majestic and victorious, and those the outsider ate drove that Catan insane. Now let's look at what happens when the Nightbringer faces Khaine-mentioned Khaine, the bloody-handed one, the Eldari god of murder, violence, destruction and war. In these times, an Eldari warrior could meet his foe without a thought for his mortal shell. His soul would live on, reborn as a phoenix from the flame. In that manner did the Eldar join their gods to wage war against the Catan. Their minions, the Necrons, parted like a sea before Khaine's wrath, and his followers, the most battle-hardened of all, blazed a flaming path across the galaxy. Slaanesh and Eldanesh, noble kings of their houses, fought at Khaine's side. Then came Kaelish Ra, as the Eldari dub him, the Deathbringer. Its rampage stained the stars with blood, and none could stand against it, for it wielded the power of death itself. Populations fell before its scythe. Its very gaze slew even the greatest of Eldar heroes. Those that died lost everything, even their souls, but the gods of the Eldar had strength other than force of arms, whilst the Deathbringer sought ever darker ways to slake its unquenchable thirst, even feasting on its own kind. Khaine struck a bargain with Vol, the smith god, in exchange for Kurnos and Isha's release from Khaine's dungeons, for he had previously imprisoned them there. Vol would forge 100 swords for Khaine's war against the Catan. Thus were born the swords of Vol, the blade wraiths. Khaine led his people to war once more, his rage incandescent, the remnants of his army aflame with the heat of vengeance. 100 Eldar, each armed with a blade wraith, faced a horde of silver Necrons to battle with. They filled the horizon, yet they knew no dread. The Eldar fought in a great circle, the swords of Vol flashing, and the Necrontyr could not penetrate their defence. The soul might contained within the swords invigorated their wielder, and every blow smashed apart an unholy foe. Khaine was unstoppable, and his warriors fought with the knowledge that their god was pleased. The battle lasted 7 days and 7 nights before the Eldar began to fall. The Catan's servants had found a weak spot in the circle. Lanthrulak the Swift was tiring, his face pale, his imperfect sword dull and blunt. The ring of warriors buckled and broke, and the ground shook as Khaine bellowed his anger. Vol, the smith, had cheated him. One of the swords was not up to scratch, it was lifeless. From the ground beneath them burst Khaine Ra, the Nightbringer, and the Eldar fell back, for they knew their doom was at hand. With a gesture, the Nightbringer slew all those near it. With a glance, it condemned the souls of great warriors to an eternity of dust. With a great roar, Khaine levelled his spear and charged. Scythe and spear clashed over a mound of corpses in a struggle that tore the skies asunder. Khaine's speed and skill was breathtaking, but the Nightbringer was a being of shadow, and the spear of Khaine could not find its mark. Khaine Ra let its foe exhaust his rage with the patience of death. Without warning, the Nightbringer swung mightily with his scythe, aiming for Khaine's throat. But Khaine had heeded the counsel of the Laughing God well. As the Nightbringer's form became solid to deliver the blow, Khaine lunged, the tip of his spear driving clean through the C'tan's chest. Khaine Ra burst apart, in an explosion of silvered shards that nearly cleft Khaine in two, as the C'tan's essence tore free of physical form. The silvered warriors around him fell to the earth as the impact spread ever outward, returning to the ground from whence they came. Soon only Khaine remained, howling his victory. But victory came at a price. Shards of the Necron's flesh, driven deep into Khaine's body by the cataclysmic demise of his foe, melted in the fires of the war god's wrath. The silver poison flowed into his bloodstream, forever tainting his physical incarnation with the aspect of the Reaper. Khaine Ra cannot truly die, for it is death incarnate. Raging at its defeat, its quintessence howled throughout space, entering every one of the Eldar race and cursing them with the terror of the grave. Thus it was that the seeds of the Eldar's downfall were sown, and ultimately the way of reincarnation was closed to them forever. So those are the consequences for the Eldari: the tainting of their god with the Reaper, the vengeful part of him, and the path for the Eldar to reincarnate being closed. What does that mean? What could they do during the War in Heaven to come back? How did the Eldari do that before the fall? Our example is an Eldari called Leathin. This Eldar did not want to leave his planet after the fall, so hung around, doing his hiding in a temple whilst worshippers of Slaanesh wander by. So he has been kept alive by being linked to a dream tree, and there he muses on the long life of his people. The natural span of his people, already measured in hundreds of stellar orbits, had been extended tenfold, 100-fold, by the technologies they had invented over the aeons. The gift of Val, the knowledge of artifice, had made them masters of the stars and their own bodies. Iliathin was not like those that embraced longevity for its own sake. There were some Eldar that sought to outlive even the stars, being rebirthed again and again down the ages. The immortal intellects, as they were sometimes known, argued that thought and will existed in isolation to the physical. For Iliathan, such a tedious existence did not appeal. He had lived long enough that the simple pleasures he knew were starting to bore him. So what does this tell us? It says that though long lived, there could come a time where they wanted to end that. It wasn't always something that happened automatically, it was a choice. And that they extended their lives using the mastery of technology, their artifice. And they used that technology in some unknown way to be reborn into new bodies. Perhaps in the bodies of Eldar children, with the souls coming back to spark at life, or perhaps something more artificially made. And this was ended with the Eldari's slow fall into depravity and their own pleasures, and the birth of Slaanesh, meaning the end of their rebirth. For if they died with no soul stone, they will be eaten by she who thirsts. If you want to know more about the War in Heaven, click on this video in the top right hand.